Hello and a very warm welcome to our second compilation episode from Season 1 of Autism Unpacked, a podcast designed to support and empower parents, carers and families of autistic children. I'm your host, Rosie Gill-Moss, and this time around we're focusing on what helps and what's hype. In other words, we'll be hearing from autism experts with advice and strategies which could benefit us all, and even a bit of myth-busting to tackle those common misconceptions. It's sometimes useful to use an analogy to understand how an autistic person views the world around them. Here's a great example of that.
So quite often, you hear about autism spectrum and you think about that linear process where at the top you're very autistic and at the bottom of that spectrum you're just a little bit autistic, and that's actually a really big misconception. It is a line of different social and environmental barriers that an autistic individual may face. So if you think of the front of an oven, you've got different knobs on the front of that oven. So if we say each knob on the oven or each dial on the oven is a barrier that an autistic individual may face. So one might be social communication, one might be sensory issues in the environment, one might be communication interaction with peer groups, and all it is that those dials are turned up to certain levels depending on that individual. So you could have one autistic individual who really struggles with social communication, so that dial's really turned up, but their sensory dial is less so they don't really have any sensory issues. And another individual, actually the dial's turned up in every single area and they struggle with a number of aspects of life and the environment and social situation around them.
There are many reasons for obtaining an autism diagnosis. We're going to hear what they are and why ultimately it's about difference, not deficit. A common misconception is that labelling a child with autism, with ADHD, is kind of, there's a negative connotation with that. You're giving them a lifetime label and often they're too young to consent. So I have been labelled. I've been labelled with autism and ADHD, proudly so. But as a teenager, I was labelled with various things, potentially borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, depression. So in your view, and I'm going to come to you, Freya, first, what would you say? What would you say are the primary reasons that you would want to get your child a diagnosis?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think that's a really, really important question. I think for me, one of the main reasons I would say to a family member or a parent or carer who is seeking a diagnosis for their child, where they'd seen that maybe the child was developing in a slightly different way compared to their peers, is I'd think about what they were hoping to get from the diagnosis. And I think for me, a diagnosis can bring lots of different benefits. So it can bring the family a really good opportunity to understand that child's unique strengths and needs. It can bring the right educational support for that child. And I think more importantly for me, it's about that child really understanding their own identity. If you continually compare yourself to your peers who are neurotypical, you're going to kind of feel a little bit rubbish because you're not going to be the same as them and you may always feel like you're falling short. If you actually realize, do you know what, my brain is neurodivergent, I'm a little bit different, I do things a little bit differently, suddenly it's not that I'm rubbish, it's that I'm different. And I think that for me is so empowering. And we know that young people who get an early diagnosis actually go on to experience less mental health conditions, they have better well-being, and they have better self-esteem. And these things are crucial for us. And I think the misdiagnosis that you've experienced, I think that's really unfortunate for many people because they've had diagnoses where they've had to have, say, treatments or attempts for things to change. Whereas actually, if we embrace someone's neurodivergence, we're not looking at change, we're not looking at deficit anymore, we're looking at difference. And that allows us to think about reasonable adaptations for the environment around us, reasonable adaptations for the people around us, but also things that we can do ourselves. What are the things that we need to do that we maybe need to learn new skills at? And what are things that we just need to, embrace and celebrate about ourselves?
It can be difficult to know where to start when it comes to getting a diagnosis. So here's some really useful advice on how to go about it.
Yeah, I think the first case for me would be to have a chat with your child's teacher or your Senko to think about kind of what was going on in school. So you could get a really good sense of them both at home and at school. So you're kind of getting that really full-rounded picture. Again, as we've already talked about, masking and camouflaging are things that autistic young people do. So be aware that school may not have always noticed the same things that you're noticing. And also school is a very structured environment. So sometimes young people feel really safe there because they know what's expected of them. They know the predictable part of the day. The other thing that I was thinking is that it would be really useful to go to talk to your GP. Your GP will be able to provide you examples of where you can go and seek an assessment from your local neurodivergent or neurodevelopmental service. And across the country, different CAMHS services do that differently. So it's really important that you get that local knowledge of where to get that assessment. If you're going to go privately, there's a few things that you really need to consider. You need to be considering that it's a multidisciplinary assessment. So it's not just one professional doing that assessment. It's a group of professionals. So clinical psychologists like myself, speech and language therapists are often involved, or occupational therapists. And then it's also important that they look and follow the DSM. So the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We're currently on edition 5. And while for me, yes, that is still a little bit deficit-led, I think it's an important thing for those diagnoses to be based on that. And that's one of the important things that the NHS will look for if you've had a private assessment. And then the third thing to look for is that those assessments will follow the NICE guidance. So NICE guidance are national recognised guidelines across all different mental health and physical health spheres that guide people to know what sort of good practice looks like. So check that your private provider would be following NICE guidance. And then if you're going to have an assessment, I suppose for me, it's really important for you to start thinking as a parent, okay, what do I need to be looking out for? What do I need to be thinking about? Maybe looking through some old baby pictures to remind yourself of developmental milestones, those sorts of things. And I think for me, the other thing that is really important is start to talk to your young person about it. Even a little young person, so even someone as young as 5 might be able to understand that I'm going to go and see somebody and we're going to go and play a game together, or we're going to go and do something different. We're going to do some activities and something might come out of that. And that's kind of okay, especially for, older children as well, that they've got I suppose, consent and are informed about the assessment process so they can expect what's going to happen.
It's not actually the case that every child needs a diagnosis of autism before they can have an EHCP. Here's the expert take on why that is. So, Sarah Jo, within your group of schools, the children would all have to have an EHCP in order to access the schools, but they don't always have to have a diagnosis of autism to get an EHCP. Is that right?
That's correct. There's a bit of a myth. People think that young people need to have a diagnosis to have an EHCP. An EHCP can be put in place if a child isn't meeting their milestones within school. So parents may flag it, the SENCO in their school may flag it in the sense that they're not reaching milestones, they're not progressing, and actually what can we do to help this child to progress? And this is where they would have a meeting with their SENCO and there'd be discussions around having an EHCP in place. So having a diagnosis isn't the only reason why you would have an EHCP.
Yeah, and actually my son, he received an EHCP before he had his formal diagnosis of autism because it was affecting his learning.
And it's also important to remember that not everybody with a diagnosis needs an EHCP as well.
So. No, quite right actually, because when I took in the diagnosis paperwork for my daughter, we had the discussion about would I be applying, putting on the SEN register, and actually no, not at the moment because she's doing really well. So but you can change your mind, can't you? If you haven't got an EHCP and you feel in the future they need one, it doesn't have to be done at the point of diagnosis either.
No, it can be from nursery. An EHCP can be put in place from a very early stage.
Obtaining an EHCP can be a challenging process, so it's useful to know what it might look like and how to deal with potential hurdles. Let's listen in. So Emma, let's assume that you have a child that you believe requires an EHCP, or they've had a diagnosis, and the next step you're thinking would be an EHCP or an educational healthcare plan. What do you do next? What's the process? Where do you begin with this?
Okay, so in order to apply for an education healthcare plan, it's really simple. It's simply a written request sent to a local authority, and that can be done by the parent. It can be done by a paediatrician. It can be done by the school as well, a social worker. It doesn't all sit with the parents, but they can request if they want to. And then the local authority have 6 weeks to get back to the parents to say, actually, we will complete the assessment or we won't complete the assessment. So that's the first hurdle sort of to get over there. So if they won't complete the assessment, you can obviously appeal that, and there's information on local authority websites how to do that. But if they do want to proceed with the assessment, then that is the point where they ask for a lot of information. The people they ask is from point A to H, to several people, but clinicians, parents, schools, healthcare, it goes on. And that's to gain the information about the child and to make that decision about whether an education healthcare plan is needed or not. But most importantly, they must ask the child for their views as well. And sometimes that can get missed. So it's really important that that is the child's wishes and needs and views are put
And there is a
forward
section in the form, isn't there, called Child View,
Yes.
and a parent or care or teacher can help them fill that in if they're not able to.
Absolutely.
I think my son says that he loves his family apart from his sister, which is brilliant. That's on a legal document. Thank you. So, Sarah Jo, you would presumably then get involved at this point. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happens within the process? Just, a little.
I like to describe it as a car journey, a long car journey for parents. There's around 4 stops, but a few bumps in the road. The first being the application, where they need to get all the evidence, as Emma was explaining, from all the professionals and people that know the young person. And it's important for them to get their stationery sorted, so they've got everything filed away, and anything that comes back, they've got the information there ready. The second stop in the journey would be the draft. The draft would then come in, but the draft would come in and the parents might not be quite happy with that draft.
They can be quite negative, aren't they?
They can be, and miss vital points out within the draft. So they can go back and say, look, can we add this? Can we add that? You've missed this. I think this is really important, that this objective needs to state this. And then they will go through, once that's gone through, they would then send the final plan through.
Coming to a decision about the provision for your child is obviously important. The advice is clear here. Look at every school and make your own decision.
Once they've got the final plan through, the parents would need to sign that off and be happy with it. And once that happens, they are then able to look at naming a provision. Now, this can be quite difficult because I think a lot of parents don't realise that local authorities will send your child's plan out to lots of mainstream provisions and maintain specialist schools before, if a parent has requested a certain school, they will still send it out to lots of other schools. But my advice would always be to parents, look at every school, go to every single school, never listen to what other people say about certain schools. Make your own decisions on that, because how successful your child is might be just through the children that they're with in their class or the teachers that they have. So I think it's really important. I stress that very much to parents. They go, I don't want my child going to this school. Yeah. And I go, please just go and have a look. So then you've got a case. So I'd say to any parent listening that, look at every single school.
I was actually given that advice as well, that I should go and visit every potential school in the area, because like you say, you hear rumours or anecdotal evidence about schools and you need to go and see them yourself. And the common theme I'm hearing is about knowledge and being informed. And I was advised to take a piece of paper with the requirements in the EHCP and make sure that the school could meet each and every single one of them, because that is your right as a parent.
Absolutely.
That is your right, and you need to go and see these schools and have a feel for them. And it's a bit sort of a bit wishy-washy, but you get a feel for where your child is going to thrive. And I think as parents, we know quite quickly whether it's the right placement for them. My son's been in 4 primary schools, so obviously my intuition is not that great, but he is now in the right setting, and it's quite scary to move a child as well, especially an autistic child.
You talked about the clipboard and having the EHCP there, and there's one key section of the EHCP, section F, which outlines the provision that should be in place for that child. So actually going to all of the schools and saying, well, can you meet this provision, is actually a really good way of seeing whether actually that school is suitable or not, and actually hearing from them if they'll be able to meet the needs. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I'd always say take a couple of highlighter pens so you can highlight the goods and the bads with it. And you can then remember there's so much to take in.
Falling asleep is one thing. staying asleep is another. Here's Nicky talking techniques, sleep cycles, and what to do if your child wakes up in the night. Are you able to sort of talk, I know, again, it's a little bit vague, but a kind of best practice for getting, and again, if we stick to the age of sort of 10, 11-ish, just for argument's sake.
Yes. So what you were talking about before, actually, about, is it good to be on electricals in their bedrooms and things like that? What's that about? So I think that's a lovely example, really, of how we're trying to support parents to support children to set the scene for falling asleep, really. And we're also setting the scene for staying asleep as well. So the first thing we talked about is we do need to prioritise sleep. Okay, we know these things are really important in your life too, and we need to prioritise sleep. So that's the first conversation. Second conversation is, as you say, strategies for falling asleep and staying asleep. So but the first thing to say is you want to set this sleep sort of settling routine within the place that they're going to stay all night.
Right.
So I'll probably go to the second bit first before I come back to the falling asleep. The staying asleep is all about sleep cycles. So basically we go through a number of sleep cycles throughout the night. So we're going into deep sleep, sort of getting that really rejuvenating sleep, then back into light stages of sleep, and then deep sleep again and light stages of sleep. And in the light stages of sleep, we might just kind of stir a little bit, and we might even have a little look around, check we are where we think we are, and then we go back to sleep again. So for children younger than 10, actually, often, but it could be sort of anything sort of up to 10 or those sorts of ages. If they're falling asleep in one place, or the parent's helping them fall asleep, and then they're asleep, and then they put them into their bed, what happens is when they get into the light stage of sleep, they wake up, and instead of kind of going, oh, no, where am I going to go back to sleep, they go, hang on, where am I?
Yes.
And by then they're wide awake.
I can remember that when they were babies, and you bring them in from the car and hope they'll stay asleep.
Yes. So, I mean, it's very typical. I mean, lots of parents do that, but it's understandable as well. Like you say, you just want your child to sleep because you're really exhausted.
I've driven around the block many times with a small baby.
Yes. So, but just in terms of thinking about what helps, I suppose, it would be about encouraging them to fall asleep in the place you want them to stay asleep. That's easier said than done. But I think you can make the room a lovely place to be. You can spend time in there. You could kind of read stories or do things that are very sleepy inducing. They might want to make the room kind of, sort of nice music. Yes, nice soft lighting. So kind of really amplifying that idea about sleep. And parents can stay, it's not about sort of shutting the door, you've got to go to sleep now. You can stay next to your child and then gradually sit next to them, then be around the room, then be sort of putting things away, so you're sort of there but not there. So it's sort of about separation in a way, really. But for them having
this is separation anxiety with these children, that the being away from the primary carer for those 12 hours at night is sometimes too scary for them.
Yes, it could be. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. So I think it's kind of knowing what might happen if they wake up. The idea about how to respond when children wake up. Often children will come into parents' beds, and again, I would say that's fine, okay. And when you want to start changing that, for them to be back, in their own beds, falling asleep. So what I'd say is invite them if they come into your bed, they can stay for that night, all night. Or if you have the energy to start a sleep program to sort of start supporting them to stay in their own bed, then try to get to sleep, even if they are in your bed with you, so that then you kind of have a sort of plan that the night that they do come in, you might want to talk to them about it first, actually, and say, we're going to have a sort of reward chart for you staying in your bed or whatever, I don't know, that they are going to go back every time. So they will come going to go back bed 9 times, and then on the 10th time you go, I'm just too tired.
And you just have to commit to this.
You have to commit to it. So I wouldn't sort of say you must do it. I'd say just do whatever works to get to sleep first, and then have a go at supporting your child to be in their own bed.
Awkward social situations can be made easier for the young autistic person by employing a strategy that's right for them. No one approach is more right than others, but all are valid. Here's the expert view.
I think I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of the work that we've done on compensation and how tiring it is and so on. And it's made me think differently about the traditional approach of sort of social skills training that people have done for years and years for autistic teenagers, for example. How are you going to start a friendship discussion or what do you do in this situation? and the sense that we're just teaching them to mask in a way that's often giving the underlying message, you're broken,
Yes.
the way you do it is wrong, you need to do it our way. And instead thinking about recasting that and having a very different attitude to it, where, as you say, healthy masking, or learning to speak the neurotypical language. So when you learn, think of it as a different language. When you learn French at school, they don't tell you, well, English is rubbish, so you've got to learn French.
No.
And now you must think in French, and you must do everything in French and forget your English because that's a bad language. You learn that English is great, that's your language. But if you want to go to France and order a meal, it would be really helpful for you if you could do this other language.
You need a few tools in your back pocket.
And if we teach neurotypical social skills in that way and say, well, eye contact doesn't come easily for you, but you will find that if you can do it the neurotypical way in some settings, it will be helpful for you. It's not saying that your way of meeting somebody, making eye contact, being is any less good. It's great, it's you, but in some settings you're going to want to put on this armour, you're going to want to put on this style because it'll help you. But it's, both ways of being, all ways of being are valid.
And I guess it's also about making sure they've got somewhere that is safe where they can take that off again.
Yes.
So that is why we see the dysregulation at home, why we're seeing perhaps, meltdowns. And I suppose it's finding that middle ground, isn't it? It's saying you don't have to keep that mask on all day. You just pop it on and take it off. I think there was a wonderful clip somewhere of sort of somebody showing putting a mask on literally putting a mask on to show how you can take it on and off again.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely analogy, Rosie. And I think for me, if I'm talking to an autistic person about that idea of masking, putting on the mask and taking it off, I always introduce the idea of energy accounting to kind of go with it. So energy accounting is an idea that certain things that you will do as an autistic person will drain your bank account or drain your social battery, whatever analogy that
I've heard it
person
called
finds.
spoons, isn't
Yes,
it?
it's like the spoon theory, but it's been created. So a lady called Maya Tugel, who is herself autistic, took the spoon theory and made it specifically for autistic people, and called it energy accounting. And basically, it's thinking about everything that you do. So, what drains your battery or your bank account, whatever, what are the things that take away energy from you? So a day of masking, a day of, being social, even if it's with a really close friend who you really want to spend time with, is still going to drain you. It's still going to leave you feeling tired and depleted. So what do you need to do in order to kind of rebuild that battery? Do you need to, at the end of the day, go and have a hot bath, not talk to anyone for an hour, have some dark time? Do you need to kind of recognise that, if I've been doing this all day, I might need to do something different. I might need to have my favourite sensory meal or something that I know will, uplift me, or do something related to my intense interest that's going to build my battery. And by talking to people about energy accounting, it allows you to see that there are always going to be things that drain our batteries, whether we're neurodivergent or we're neurotypical, there are always going to be activities that drain our batteries. But we know autistic people and a lot of autistic girls and women will do more things every day to drain their battery. They won't always give themselves time or the emotional availability to rebuild that battery because they can feel guilty about that. And they then won't, that then leads to burnout, mental health issues, to just being exhausted, that again sense of, not really knowing who you are. So by using energy accounting as a strategy, it can be really helpful because you don't feel guilty about giving yourself half an hour doing your intense interest, having a bath. You're recognising it is absolutely integral to your well-being. It's a really, really great strategy.
Demand avoidance is a phrase you might be familiar with, but here's a chance to find out firsthand what it actually means from a professional perspective.
So Rosie, demand avoidance is something where young people experience either intense distress, maybe intense anxiety or intense overwhelm, and become almost dysregulated when demand is placed upon them. So that could be something like asking them to stop doing something, to start a new task. And that young person might become very overwhelmed by that demand. And it could even be something that they really like as well. So you might be offering them something that they enjoy, but the demand of that thing might have then become overwhelming for that young person.
So it's not it's not as straightforward as a child simply saying no to things they don't want to do. This demand avoidance can come about when it's an activity that they would usually enjoy. Would we see it perhaps if they were playing a computer game, something like that? Is it always when they're interrupted doing something they love, or can it happen at any time?
Yeah, it can happen at any time. It doesn't have to be just when they're interrupted. So it could be a young person who's, asked to start something. So, either get up in the morning or do something like brush their teeth. And it could be something that either is a routine part of their day, which they're used to doing, and maybe they would have done on their own. But it's the part of it that maybe that there's the demand itself that induces the anxiety, the discomfort, the distress in that young person. So we can all say no. We've all been in that situation, whether we're, young people or grown-ups, where someone asks us to do something that we don't want to do and we can say no. But I suppose demand avoidance is much deeper than that. So it's not that we just don't want to do something, it's that thing is causing us to feel extremely uncomfortable, extremely distressed, and it's almost like preventing a barrier from stopping us from doing that thing.
Children may exhibit signs of demand avoidance in a number of ways. To understand what that could look like, let's listen to a considered clinical viewpoint. Can you give us a few more examples of how it might exhibit in children?
Yeah, so it could be, for a young person, when a demand is requested of them, that they become extremely dysregulated, so they could become very upset or they could become angry. It could also be that they also get very skillful at learning how to avoid demands. So, for example, using distraction. So as a parent, you might kind of, ask your young person, oh, should we go out today? Oh, well, actually, I'm just going to do this, or how about this, or could you tell me about this? So they could get really skilled in that kind of distraction. So then as a parent, you've then kind of lost track and gone something else and the demand has been avoided. These children generally are also described as being a little bit more comfortable in sort of things like role play and social play. They can also sometimes be a little bit more obsessional with their relationships as well. So there's a few different things that we would look at.
Collaboration is key when you're dealing with a young person with demand avoidance. Preparation and knowing when to talk and when not to is important too. Let's take a listen.
First of all, I'd say to a parent, be kind to yourself. It's a tough job, and be kind to your young person. And then think about how you can work with that young person. So as Paula was mentioning earlier, that collaboration piece. So that would be really, really useful. And tend to sort of almost kind of think about, we've also talked a lot today about pick your battles. Mm-hmm. So you might decide to kind of really think about what kind of day are you or is your young person having? Is it a complete stop day? Is it a no day? So are they at burnout? Actually, that is not a good day for you to say, actually, can you do all of these things that are on the list that I need you to do? Because that young person is kind of at their end of their tether. They might be sort of, a medium day, for example, where actually you could ask for some small demands that they're usually, that they can do, that they feel confident in. Those are the sorts of things that they can, do easily. And then you might have go days where, that young person is in a really great mood, they're feeling really confident, and that might be the day where you can give them some more of those demands and challenges. And I think it's just, as a parent, again, getting to know your young person really, really well, working with them to think about those strategies and thinking about those communication styles as well.
Now, Paula, what happens when... We talked a little bit about this dysregulation that can occur. So if you've got a 5 or a 6-year-old who is refusing to get in the car, put their seatbelt on, it's not pleasant, but it's manageable. When they start to get bigger, and sometimes these outbursts can be violent and they can be angry, what's that like for a parent? How do you cope with that?
Absolutely, that's super challenging. What we would do in our house, our young person isn't violent, but will brick wall us, as we like to call it. But we do sort of a bit of a rewind of the situation. We'll say, come on, let's go back in the house. Let's take some time out, have a drink, have a packet of crisps. We'll talk about it in 15 minutes, half an hour. And then we'll go back and say, is this something we can fix, or is this a no day? Yeah. Is this just not going to happen? Sometimes he will come back and say, I can do it in half an hour. And we'll say, okay, leave you to it. We'll be back in half an hour. Obviously, there's some things in life that are very time sensitive. So appointments and things like that, we have lots and lots of prior warning. We find transitions are quite a challenge for our young person. So making sure we're not just saying, this is the place we're going. We'll also be this is how long we'll be in the car, this is the journey we're taking, this is where we're parking, this is the walk from the car park to the place that we're going to, really breaking it down so there's nothing in there that he can kind of be overly worried about because we've spoken about it in depth beforehand. So for those things that we know we've got to be there at a certain time, we'll sometimes say it's a little bit earlier.
I was going to say to you about the time.
We can often say we need to be there at 10 when really it's 11. But also if we're 5, 10, 15 minutes late, most places are really accommodating if you just give them a call and say we're running late, that they are okay. And as a parent, holding on to your anxieties around that. So I really like to be on time. I realised that was quite a challenge for me, being really late. So I had to work on that for me and go, is this a hill I want to die on today? Or kind of really making sure you're planning every step of it, so you're taking away some of that and doing a rewind. Let's go back in the house, let's go back to your safe space and give you some of your safe things, and we can go from there rather than digging your heels in at the car door.
Autism shifts the family dynamic considerably. Supporting siblings and having a plan helps ensure no one in the family feels they're missing out. Here's some first-hand experience of that. I'm now also thinking about families where you've got more than one child. So perhaps in a family you've got one child that's neurodivergent and has got a demand avoidance profile, and then you might have siblings that do not. That's going to be quite challenging as a parent, because if you, for example, take the kids to the beach and you've got one child that absolutely refuses to set foot on the stand, I've literally been in this position, and the other children are quite upset because they want to do this nice family activity, and that can cause, I imagine, some degree of animosity or even resentment within the family dynamic itself. I'm wondering whether you've got any tips or strategies for families out there that are living this very real reality and how they can manage it.
Yeah, I think for families, again, as you were mentioning, Rosie, that could be really tricky for siblings because they could feel really angry. You know, why is my brother always ruining things? Or why is my sister getting away with so much that I can't get away with? So again, I think it comes back to, you know, talking as a family and helping those siblings understand that young person's differences, and helping those, you know, their siblings understand that sometimes actually that young person might feel, you know, overwhelmed or anxious. So the siblings then are able to kind of have a better understanding, and actually understand that some of that is actually really, you know, really quite usual for siblings to have that kind of degree of conflict. But I think it's about helping them to understand, being prepared, for maybe having, you know, a secondary plan. So maybe if there is a young person within the family who doesn't want to do something, if there's two parents or you've brought a friend with you or there's something else, or you've got a plan B. So the plan A was that we're all going to go to the beach, but maybe plan B is if one of the young people can't get out of the car or is feeling, you know, doesn't want to go in the beach, that there is a plan B, how else that could sort of, how else you could manage that day so the other young people don't miss out. So again, it is a complex juggling act, and I think it's always kind of almost, you have to not just be one step ahead, but maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead.
So thinking about the sibling dynamic, and in a household where you might have some neurotypical and neurodivergent children, what can parents do you think, to sort of mitigate the feeling of perhaps being a little bit unseen for the child that's living alongside somebody with avoidance?
A friend of mine does a lovely thing called a yes day with her neurotypical child. So where they've had several instances of perhaps not being able to go and do that thing, or having to cancel arrangements because their youngest couldn't access it, they will allow the sibling of that child to nominate a yes day, and during that day his mum takes him out for the day. They do exactly what he would like to do within reason. She says yes to lots of different things, and he can ask for that. So if he starts to feel like he's losing out, he can go to his mum and say, can we book one in the next week or 2 weeks? And she'll put it on the calendar, and he feels like, yeah, I've had to miss out on those things, but I'm going to get to do some things I'm really excited about. So that really works well for them as a family.
That brings our special compilation episode to an end. Thank you so much for listening. I hope what you've heard reminds you just how strong, resilient and inspiring our community truly is. You're doing an incredible job and you're not alone. If something here made you smile or feel seen, then please do share and follow us on your socials. And of course, you can subscribe and hear our episodes in full to pick up even more expert advice and guidance. And keep a lookout for Series 2 coming later this year. So until next time, take care, stay hopeful and keep celebrating every step of the journey we are on together.